When it comes to the history of NHRA drag racing, there are interesting, provocative, and impactful moments from each and every season of competition. Yeah, even those years when the number of NHRA national events was barely a crooked number are still really fun to examine. Perhaps none more so than 1963. This season, 60 years ago, consisted of just two national events: the Winter Nationals in Pomona and the U.S. Nationals, simply known then as the Nationals, in Indianapolis. Those two events were the entirety of the national event slate and the true focal points of the drag racing world during the 63 season. If there are two factors we need to look at regarding the 1963 campaign, they are people and fuel. But first, let's start with fuel. As many hardcore drag racing fans know, the NHRA instituted a pump gas only rule for the 1957 season, typically called the nitro ban. It's one of the most misunderstood and wrongly blamed decisions in drag racing history. Instituted on March 1st of 1957, people point directly to Wally Parks when this topic comes up. Those people are wrong with who they're looking at, and there's plenty of evidence to prove it otherwise. The decision was not Wally's, nor was he even present when it was actually made. The entire nitro ban affair was triggered by a run made on February 3, 1957. This was when the famed Cook and Bedwell dragster of Emery Cook and Cliff Bedwell, with an unblown nitro-burning Chrysler Hemi, ran 166.97 miles an hour at the Lions drag strip in California. Many track operators saw that as a bridge too far to cross. Starting with Wally's own words from his 1966 book, Drag Racing Yesterday and Today, The Story of the World's Fastest Sport, he writes, "For several months, drag racing officials had been watching the fantastic increases in speed with mixed emotions. They wanted to see the continuing development of new ideas, but they also realized that the speeds are outpacing the safety of features of the cars and of the strips themselves." In February 1957, representatives of Santa Ana, San Fernando, Pomona, San Gabriel, Lions drag strip, Kingdon, Saugus, and Colton met in Los Angeles and voted to restrict all engines to automotive pump gas only. The ban went into effect March 1, 1957 at these California strips and rapidly expanded to include most of the nation. The reasons? Economy and safety protections in behalf of contestants. NHRA agreed to support the move. End quote. In the event you think I'm heading into the tank for Wally Parks, will include the words of the February 23, 1957 edition of Drag News, the legendarily independent drag racing paper that covered all arenas of the sport and gave no favor to the NHRA. In a story with no byline entitled Automotive Pump Gas Only Operation Adopted by Growing Drag Strip Organization March 1, the following is excerpted. Quote, "Taking the first step in what is expected to be a nationwide movement, the 7 Los Angeles area strips and Kingdon facility located near Stockton have ruled any fuel but automotive gasoline illegal in any competition class after March 1. The Santa Ana strip was actually the first to act, discontinuing special fuels February 10th. End quote. It should also be mentioned that the tracks attending this meeting also debated banning superchargers of any sort, multiple engines, and we're also considering a 450 cubic inch maximum displacement limit. Here's the wildest part of the whole ban story. While this was going on, Wally Parks was 2,000 miles away. The week the meeting was held, Wally was on Daytona Beach as the editor of Hot Rod magazine, running the famed Suddenly 1957 Plymouth Savoy. He was racing the car to record speeds with his right-hand man Ray Brock. The man literally returned to California to this news. A few weeks later, Wally announced that the NHRA would back the gasoline-only approach throughout the whole organization. It's folly to think that the NHRA tracks did not run nitro cars from 1957 to 1963. In fact, many of the tracks that started this business relented rather quickly, but as far as the one national event per year from 1957 to 1959 and the two from 1960 to 1962 are concerned, it was gasoline, or as the old-time racers back then called it, Blackie Carbon only. But 1963 happened, and here's where things get very interesting. As the 1963 season dawned, Wally Parks and the rest of the company leadership made a large decision, undoubtedly influenced by the fact that nitromethane was being used with impunity around the country and had been since it was disallowed at NHRA events. The 1963 Winter Nationals would introduce a new class being run as a one-off test. It was to be called Top Fuel. Once again, quoting Drag Racing Yesterday and Today, Wally Parks says, quote, "Drag Racing 1963 dawned on February 15th to the 17th with a third annual Winter Nationals Championship. The big news at the event was the return of the eye-watering, ground-shaking, record-breaking fuel dragsters to the NHRA competition scene. What few people know about the Winter Nationals in this era is that, like today, there were entry limits. Yeah, there was a cap of 500 entries at the 1963 Winter Nationals, and many more because of the short days and lack of lighting at the facility. The Top Fuel field was an 8-car qualified affair, once again representing the experimental nature of this reacceptance of nitro. While the logic is never explained in Wally's book or really anywhere else, it was decided that the second event of the year, the Nationals, would be run as gasoline only. So this was a split season of NHRA nitromethane drag racing. But why? The only thought chain I can employ here is that NHRA management looked at the concentration of nitro-burning dragsters and in seeing a majority of them on the western side of the country, didn't want to discourage eastern competitors from making the trip to Indy to compete for top eliminator honors. Nitro would stay in California for 1963. Looking back at the racing action itself, we see a true collection of coast-to-coast greats winning their respective classes at the 1963 Winter Nationals. For starters, Al Ekstrand, a corporate lawyer for Chrysler and exceptionally talented wheelman, won stock eliminator in a 1963 Dodge that reeled off a succession of low 12-second runs, culminating at a 12:44 at 115 to win the title. Tommy Grove, who would go on to become an early funny car hero a few seasons later, won Superstock in the Melrose Missile. Pennsylvania's Dave Strickler, with tuning by a young Bill Jigs Jenkins, ran 12:38 at a speed of 115 to win the A-Stock class. Future wheel standard race Wild Bill Shrewsbury won the AFX category, driving Mickey Thompson's 1963 Super Duty Pontiac Tempest. Shrewsbury ran 12:04 at more than 116 miles an hour. Johnny Loper, whose name would become synonymous with his successful Arizona speed shop chain as well as funny car racing in the 70s and 80s, won B-Gas by turning out a package of runs that culminated with an 11:91 at 114.94. Doug Cook, driving the famed Stone, Woods & Cook Swindler A, managed to win both the A-Gas Supercharged and Middle Eliminator categories while running a best of 10:02 at 139 miles an hour. In the AA Street Roadster category, it was Hugh Tucker and his silver Ventura Motors Chevrolet winning at 10:30 at 138. Tucker also won Junior Eliminator honors at the end of the meet. So what of the dragsters? The gasoline-burning contingent was seemingly out to prove something to the nitro-burning teams on this weekend as they put on one heck of a show and ran really close to the fuel dragsters, perhaps closer than anybody in the modern times would have suspected they were able to. For instance, the top speed of the meet for a gas dragster came from the Peters and Frank Freight Train. The twin-engine dragster ran 185.18 miles an hour. Top speed for the fuel dragsters was 188.66 by the Weekly Rivero Holding and Fox Frantic 4 team. Seems pretty wild, right? Elapsed times are not that far a spread either. The Freight Train set low ET on gasoline at 8:36, and Don Garlett set low ET in top fuel at 8:11. Sure, it's a couple of tenths, but that's still within spitting distance between gasoline and nitromethane. The competition was hot and heavy. On the gasoline-burning side, the final AA dragster class elimination saw the Freight Train take on some upstart kid from Michigan named Connie Coletta. The kid's dragster was called the Bounty Hunter and was a strong runner, but the twin-engine and pro-level driving skill of Bob Moravez was too much for Coletta to stave off, and they won the class, running 8:74 at 177. As was the case back then, class eliminations were run, and then the actual eliminator was contested. This under the guise of top gas, and as was often the scenario, the players were the same. Coletta would get another shot at the train in the final, and it would be for the big trophy, the accolades, and whatever else Wally was giving away that year. Coletta knew that he had one shot to win the race, and that would be to get a leap on Moravez and find the finish line stripe before the twin-engine monster caught him. Unfortunately for Coletta, Moravez was his equal on the starting line, and he was outrun by a car length at the finish line. An 8:82 at 178 earned them their first national event win. Connie Coletta would have to wait. The 8-car top fuel category lived up to the hype. When the third and final round of eliminations rolled up, it was two men from Florida, men who had traveled together and perhaps the longest distance of any others to compete at the Winter Nationals, Don Garlett and Art Malone. They would run against each other for glory on Sunday afternoon. Quoting again from Drag Racing Yesterday and Today, Wally Parks writes, quote, "With the huge crowd giving both drivers a standing ovation, the supercharged mounts rolled slowly to the line. They left under completely different circumstances in a cloud of smoke. The two cars were hidden from view by a trail of smoke, and it was not until the signal lights from the Krondeck wind score lights penetrated the dark cloud that it was learned that Don Garlett was the winner." End quote.
The run for top fuel eliminator finds Don Garlett from Tampa, Florida, going against Art Malone, also from Florida. Coming out of the tire smoke is Don Garlett, the winner in his Dodge-powered Swamp Rat 5, turning a lightning 186.32 in 8.26 seconds.
Swamp Rat 5 had won 8:26 at 186 miles an hour, and Don Garlett had finally won his first NHRA national event. There is an interesting side note to this story as well. Garlett's dragster was equipped with a huge wing over the engine and was derided by some, including the tech department, when he got to the track, but Garlett fought for his right to run the wing and proclaimed to anyone that would listen, including a film crew shooting the race, that someday every fuel dragster in existence would have a wing.
We'll need it.
Now let's meet Don Garett of Tampa, Florida, a man responsible or involved in two firsts here. One, first time they've run fuelers at an NHRA meeting, and two, that airfoil we'll get to in a moment. How are you, Don?
Hello, George.
Don, what are the speed records so far for fuelers?
Well, unofficially, the fuel record is probably around 190 and right below 8 seconds. However, this is the first time that NHRA has opened the record books for fuel, so there'll be official records after today.
What is that airfoil intended to do?
George, we've been developing that for a couple of weeks now, working on it. That's to hold the car down in the lights to keep it from skating so bad at the high speeds.
How's it worked out so far?
Well, I only made one run with it, and it was extremely stable down on the big end. However, we had a little too much pressure, and I think it slowed the car down 4 or 5 miles an hour.
Right again, Big Daddy. Right again. The wing likely aided Garett's because of the fact that at the top end of the racetrack, during a previous day's rain, water had soaked into the asphalt. With the sun out on Sunday eliminations, the water was wicking through the pavement, causing many cars to spin the tires at the top end. The additional downforce provided by the oddly placed wing on Garett's dragster likely kept his machine planted and planted for a victory. But now it's time to get to Indy. The story of the 1963 NHRA Nationals would not have anything to do with nitromethane, but it would have to do with the method of starting a drag race.
They must be pushed up to the line. When the cars cross the starting line, they will break the light beams and start the electronic timers in the timing tower. Ready in the right lane, ready in the left lane. Keep your eyes on the Christmas tree, the electronic starter. The sequence of lights takes 2.5 seconds from top to bottom. And they're away. Practice or not, it's all out all the way. It's only 440 yards from start to finish. When the cars cross the finish line, they break the finish line light beams and stop the timers. The first car to cross the finish line also trips the lane lights, which are provided to tell the spectators which lane won.
The 1963 Nationals would be the introduction of the Christmas tree, and to say it wasn't widely loved would be the understatement of the last 60 years. Established racers who held performance advantages in their respective categories hated the tree. These men had developed their own methods for reading a flagman's movements, proclivities, and habits. This was a methodology all its own, and now with this electronic device, some, quote, lesser racer could get the jump and beat them in a slower car. Oh, the shame of a whole shot loss was being introduced to drag racing. The earliest trees had no pre-stage or stage bulbs, so an official would bring each competitor to the beams manually. Thus, the rudimentary practice of shallow and deep staging was born. The claimed 100,000 rabid fans got one heck of a show at the Nationals. Because of the new Christmas tree starting system, the competition eliminator class was run with a handicap start. This was met with jubilation from fans who had become accustomed to seeing some very lopsided matchups that lacked excitement. The handicaps were built off the class records of each of the competing vehicles per pair. The run for the Little Eliminator title serves as the perfect example here. This was a match between the AFX-winning Chevrolet of Dave Strickler and the BFX-winning Royal Oak Pontiac driven by Ace GM marketing genius Jim Wangers. Wangers got the jump, and the crowd was on pins and needles as they waited for Strickler to leave. They really let loose when Strickler caught Wangers at the finish line and claimed victory 12-10-120, beating a 12-61 at 118. Other winners in the various classes of competition included Herman Mosier in stock running with the Ram Chargers team in the famed Candymatic 63 Dodge. He beat fellow Chrysler racer and Winter Nationals winner Al Ekstrand in the final, a 12-22, topping a 12-23 in a nail-biter. Middle eliminator honors went to the all-conquering Ohio George Montgomery when he took his class-winning A-Gas supercharged Willys to the finish line with a 10-22 at 139. This run handily outpaced his opponent, Gene Altsire from Virginia, who couldn't crack the 10s. It would be the mighty dragsters that stole the headlines again, though. Remember, this was an all-gasoline race, so following the action here is less complicated than it was in Pomona to start the season. Don Garett was at the Nationals in hopes of a full NHRA calendar sweep, but there were plenty of people ready to stand in his way. 38 entries were recorded in the AA dragster category, while Gordon Collecting Collett would score the low ET of the meet with an 850, and Connie Coletta would score top speed of the meet at 182.18, but neither Collett nor Coletta would make the final round on Monday. During class eliminations on Sunday, Don Garett took care of the field and completed his AA dragster class trouncing with an 874 at 174 miles an hour.
Well, here's a happy guy right now, Don Garett, who has just won the Class AA dragster competition, and Gee, it must give you a thrill to win this thing with gas in that tank.
Certainly does, being we run fuel most all the rest of the time.
Actually, this is kind of a new car for you, isn't it, Don?
Right, it's brand new for this meet, just built it.
How fast did you go in it on that final run? I didn't get the final figures there.
Final run was 174 miles an hour with an 8.73 elapsed time.
Oh, that's tremendous. Well, actually, you've earned the title of the King of the Dragsters. You actually started back, what, 10 years ago before anybody even heard of it? Well, maybe Mickey Thompson.
Well, they were running on the coast when we started racing. Florida and California were the first. I think California was a little ahead of Florida, but in 1950 we were holding drag races.
It's an intriguing thing. I can understand why guys go around a track, but I've often wondered how you could spend all that time and all that money to go for 8.73 seconds.
That's the thing. It's the challenge of that. See, in the beginning they were running in 15, 16 seconds, and the experts all put limitations of, you know, ridiculous times, 12, 13 seconds, and then everybody just went to beat that, and finally they got them down into the 7s in places.
Well, I'll tell you this, as far as sports are concerned, this is absolutely the most expensive in terms of dollars per second in all of sport.
Right.
Let's take a look at the interior of this. I think it's kind of an unusual car in that you've got things in there that we don't normally see in a let's say, in an automobile.
It's built entirely for acceleration, going in a straight line. There's absolutely nothing on this car that's not vital to the operation of it. There's no pieces, not even one washer is on this car just because we think it looks good.
Yeah. This I see is the
parachute.
Right.
This is the brake. This little thing, the aiming device or steering wheel or handle grip, what you want to call it, steers it, and the kill switch for the magneto, and the clutch and the throttle pedal, and that's about it.
I imagine it's too comfortable in there, isn't it?
No, it's not too comfortable.
This earned him the majority of Monday off. As was the practice of the Nationals back then, if you won class eliminations on Sunday, you got to sit and watch all day on Monday as the qualified cars hammered each other to an eventual winner that got the honor of running the class eliminator winner for the top eliminator crown. As it turns out, the finalist was Bobby Vodnik, a 19-year-old kid driving the Harada and Hobbs dragster. Coming into the final, the performance numbers favored Vodnik, whose car had been in the 860s while Garlett's was running 870s. Undoubtedly, this was playing on Garlett's mind when he staged the dragster and then became the first man in history to lose a top eliminator final on a red light displayed on the bottom of the Christmas tree.
But Vodnik isn't a hero yet. He's got to beat Big Daddy, Don Garlett's. Knowing that Vodnik had been posting better elapsed time, Garlett's gambles and jumps the start. He's disqualified with an 8.67 elapsed time, while Vodnik is declared Mr. Eliminator. Vodnik covered the 440 yards in 8.62 seconds, hitting a speed of 174.75 miles an hour. Pretty good for a 19-year-old kid in his first year of racing.
Vodnik still outran him on performance, turning an 862 to Garlett's 865 after the final. It was a crown and glory for young Bobby Vodnik, who would go on to have future success against Garlett's as well, and the run still stands as one of the greatest single upsets in the history of drag racing. As we've seen, the 1963 season was a seminal one for the NHRA, Wally Parks, and the entire sport of drag racing. Top Fuel would return full-time in 1964, the Christmas tree would stay permanently and alter the face of the sport forever, and the major stars of drag racing, from Garlett's to Coletta, Cara Macinas, and Ivo, were all becoming household names for hot rodders and enthusiasts from coast to coast. Moving forward, the handicap start system had been moved into more categories, and that left 3 heads-up classes of competition. Top Fuel, Top Gas, and Top Stock Eliminators would serve as the premier attraction for fans as the sport continued to evolve. This look back at the 1963 season shows us a lot about the roots of the sport we see today. In 60 years, the art of traveling in a straight line in the shortest time possible has been refined in ways no one would have imagined back then. One can only begin to think what people will say about the 2023 drag racing season when the 2083 season rolls around. As always, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more history and automotive content.